Interviewing Mr. J. Bentley Radcliffe and his new book, Checkmate: Strategies for Success in a Very Competitive Environment. Bentley, how are you today?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you for having me today, and thank you for putting on this interview today. I'm very excited about it. The new book is obviously a real high for me. As you showed it, it's Checkmate, called Mastering Competitive Sales Strategy. It's something I've done my whole life, and I wanted to share my experiences and my wins and my losses in life, and how to use those to better your own sales efforts of your own, so that you can use it and beat your competition more often.
Hmm.
So,
Well, it sounds interesting. I've read the book and it's fascinating. You've got some really good strategies, I think, especially today with so much competition in the marketplace and so difficult to get cut through. People don't want cold calls, they don't want to do emails, they don't want to do texts, they don't want to do videos. I mean, we're all trying to figure out what it is to differentiate yourself in such a crowded marketplace. So, this book is really timely. But when I was reading about this, and I was reading about the section about your dad, it sounds really interesting how he influenced your knowledge and your training and your trajectory in life. I mean, I remember that commercial, that Geritol Old Blood. I don't think I actually saw it, but I know I read about it. So obviously he's one of those original Mad Men guys back in the day. Can you tell me a little bit about your inspiration?
well, I was very lucky growing up. Dad grew up in Brooklyn and moved to Miami in the 50s, where he started a business. But prior to that, he was a news correspondent for the U.S. Army in the Japanese islands.
Oh, really?
And he had a very interesting career. Wrote a lot about. He was really the first. He and his camera team were the first ones in to see what had happened once the Americans took over the islands, to include the palace of the Japanese emperor. So it was very interesting. He was he had a psychiatry degree from Cornell and a master's degree from Columbia. And when he got out of the war, he and his best friend and photographer from the army decided that they were going to go in and do marketing and advertising in New York. And of course, the place to do it was in Madison Avenue. Now, remember, comparatively to the story of Mad Men, which begins in the 60s, Dad was there in the 40s. And so it was very, very early. And there were a lot of great things going on. Dad got involved with a company called Revlon, which is a cosmetic company, and became very friendly with the CEO, was Charlie Revson. And Dad used to talk about him all the time because they became great friends. Dad, being a young man, Revson being a little bit older, was kind of an inspiration and mentor to him. My dad's father was an immigrant, so he was more aligned to, he was a meat cutter. So it was really a big, diverse change for my dad to go on to Madison Avenue and do that. And during that time, the story behind Geritol was that there was a contest that was to write the best two-line slogan since war ends. And Dad came up with this idea because Geritol was one of the customers that he picked up, as well as Revlon. But it's funny that it was Charlie Revson that said to him, put a question mark after it. And he said, and that's what it was. And he actually won the contest, which is a great thing, because he won a lot of money back in those days. So it was a big win for him. But he did that with Revlon and then at Geritol, of course. And then in the 50s, he met my mom actually at the Fontainebleau Hilton in Miami Beach on vacation, and she was living in Florida, and he decided that he'd had enough of the North, and he moved down there with her. And of course, I was born in the early 60s. And he was an inspiration to me. He started his own air conditioning business. He wrote his own collaterals. I mean, he had that advantage, right? But he was also a designer, a natural designer, because obviously he wasn't trained. But developing an air conditioning manufacturing company in Miami in the 1950s, you could say was a hot market, because
location.
He was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And I grew up with him. Of course, he was an antique automobile collector, and he wrote a book called Adventures of a Vintage Car Collector, which I'm in. And he taught me so many things. So it was an inspiration. He was an interesting guy. And I miss him terribly, but he's been gone for 25 years. So I'm following in his footsteps and doing my thing. So
Yeah,
we
so
each have our own books.
That's a great story and a great background. I can see how his tutelage and the psychological thinking of how do you position a product or service was ingrained in you from a very young age. So let me ask you a question. I know that you've spoken in dozens of different countries. They've brought you all over the world to do speaking engagements, stuff like that. You work with, I think, 20,000 different customers over your time. I mean, you've got some amazing credentials. So when it comes to this, it's like, why does somebody read a book? I mean, write a book. And I have to ask you another story here, Bentley. So I was waiting for this book. I went out front and it was stolen. So this book was so hot, it was literally stolen off my porch. This is my second copy because the first one was too hot. So what exactly made you write this amazing book?
Well, first of all, I called your neighbor, David, and I told him.
That's your competitive strategy right there.
Absolutely. It's competitive strategy, actually. No, I just thought, I wrote the book because as you mentioned, I've spent a lot of my career. I was with the big firms, and for about 13 years, companies such as Sun Microsystems and Apple and Cisco, the networking company, not the food company. And I worked a lot with salespeople. I eventually became chief of staff over one of the divisions. So I was used to working with the salespeople, doing things, and I've always found it was ways to get around things. But it was one company in particular. I was working for a company called Sun Microsystems, it's Scott McNeely, in fact, who taught me a lot of these things indirectly, some of it directly, some of it very directly, about when you win, when you lose. And one of my first experiences was working with one of the government agencies, trying to get more of our equipment and our technology in it. And we were up against companies like IBM, which dominated the business and all of the heavy stuff. But we were the hot little workstation company. They had one. It was a control unit for a piece of manufacturing equipment. And long story short, we managed to win the business. And it was very exciting because we managed to sell about 200 units into that. What caught me by surprise was that IBM came in and financed the equipment. And I said, oh, who cares, right? What does it matter where the money comes from? Well, I learned a lesson the next year the hard way. Thou who owns the paper owns the account. And so when we were discussing it and debriefing it, because the next year made it very difficult, they got a lot of business out of it. And we only got a small bit piece of it because it was much cheaper to buy their technologies because of the financing and the way that they revolved it. And so therefore, I got caught by surprise, and we sat down and discussed it. And it turned out it was a loss recovery competitive strategy. The idea was to win something and not lose it all, and then come back and leverage that win at a later date. Mm-hmm. And I started putting that into my competitive bag because I said, boy, that's really smart. And in the book, we call that the loss recovery strategy, but that's a really important thing that I learned. And I started learning more and more and more about competition. Eventually, when I left and I went on into Apple and other places, I started to use some of those strategies as I wrote them down, and said, okay, these are things I'll use one day in life. Well, a little bit later, as I left the industry itself and started my own company, and my first company was called CompeteNet. Mm-hmm. And for obvious reasons, we were doing competitive strategy. Our first deals were working with companies like IBM and like companies like HP and some of the other big technology companies that were at that time the dominant players in the marketplace, Oracle. And they were like really excited about the idea of how do you beat the competition. So the strategy started to mature. We learned a little more about how do you set up the competition, and all of these pieces came together. So after all these years, 20 years of running that business, I finally decided I'd put it all down on paper. And that's how the book came about. And we organized it in a way to make it easy to remember. And the one major point that I try to make in there is that this is, a supplemental. This is not going to replace your sales process. This is you add it into your sales process so that you don't have to change what you're doing. You just add a few of these strategies in to make it easier so that you don't get caught like I did by the competition, or that I caused others in the future to deal with competitive tax. So that's kind of where it was. It just, I love tech. I love doing different ways of educating people. We were also heavily involved in soft skills and simulation because sales is all about negotiation. I talk a little bit about that in here as well. It's about business acumen, understanding the companies and all of that. So that kind of led to where I was with the book. And that's kind of what it's all about.
So when you think about sales enablement, and over the past 20 years, I mean, obviously you were one of the first people that do it. And I think there was a chap that actually coined the term sales enablement a little over a decade ago. What do you see as far as the convergence of the technology and the knowledge? So what I'm seeing in the marketplace is I'm seeing SDRs, BDRs, sales reps, whatever you want to call their title, they're trying to force a technical solution on a organic problem, i.e., I mean, it's a people problem first. Once you figure that out, then to me, you bring the tech. And I see the exact opposite happening. I mean, what have you seen in the past 2 decades? Has it been more of like a tech focused or a people focused? What's happened?
Well, that's a good question. It kind of comes and goes. Salespeople start out young and they're selling the product. They get trained by the product. They go in and they start talking about the product, and then they start to learn, I need to build relationships. I need to understand the customer's problem, but I'm not sure exactly how to do that. And then it kind of revolves into the need of the customer. Today, they say that customers, something like 60% of the workload on a sale is having the customers already done prior to you being there on what their particular needs are. Now, I can agree to that if it's something that's obvious that I need. Mm-hmm. As a seller in life, I have learned that not everything is obvious to everybody.
Right.
And that once you get inside of an organization and you start to live the organization, the culture, and the job that's at hand, very often you stop seeing all the broad opportunity that you could have. And that's where consultants come in and play a big part, because we have the advantage of looking from the outside in, seeing opportunity or being aware of something new that is going to impact the way you do business in the future. So while I do believe if I am out, let's say I am a technologist, or I run the manufacturing, the MRP solution environment, I'm looking for a piece of technology to fix a problem. Yes, I will do the research on that. But what I didn't know is that maybe that piece of technology that I was expecting, that I'm making this stuff up, to do a mold or to fold or stamp a piece of metal, can be done on a 3D printer that I never even thought of for a far less price. So that's where the salesperson comes in. As a salesperson, your job is to educate the customer on what can be done. And it's really, really important. So therefore, going back to that point, 60-70% of the job is done unless you bring your creativity and your ability to, what I call, sell the solution to the table, where the customer may not have thought of these things. That's the value. So, those are a lot of the things that come to mind in that particular space. I like to add the competitive spin.
Right.
Because I don't want to get caught by the competition. I like to have a couple of strategies in place to do that. So, those are some of the things that I think are really important moving forward. We're just entering a whole new world now in the metaverse. I'm trying to design, figure out what that means and and how that's going to impact buying and selling in the future. It's brand new, but it's something that's happening. So as I said, I just love tech. I love all the different ways that tech can get applied, and of course, it's so much fun to sell it when somebody sees the light and the vision that you bring to them.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So when we read through the book and we talk about Colts, I'm wondering if we should break it down into those 3 stages and maybe have you dive in a little bit more deeper into that so our listeners can have a better idea of how you're thinking and how that strategy works. If I recall correctly, stage 1 was proactively profiling and building an approach plan. Was that right?
Yeah, I call it preemptive competitive sales strategy. So let's just start before I kind of dig into Colts. Talk a little bit about what companies have on hand. A lot of companies do research or have what's called a CI, competitive intelligence organization. Their job is to research their competitors. The bigger the company, obviously, the bigger the organization. Sometimes they even have what they call a competitive war room. These are places where you can get all the intelligence. You can find out your strengths, your weaknesses of the competitor, and all different types of product capabilities they have or service capabilities they have. It's an incredibly valuable service. The problem is that is what we call the what. That's what this is all about. And they create battle cards or SWOT analysis. The problem is, what do I do with that? Going out to a customer with a piece of paper that has your check boxes all the way on the left side showing you do everything and your competitors only do these few things. Competitor has exactly the same thing, shows you over here. Or they bring the Gartner Magic Quadrant to the table. They we're all the way up here in the corner. Therefore, we're the safe decision. Trying to build that competitive feeling. That's great, but that's not strategy.
Right.
And very often, war rooms are used at the last minute. And that's when it's almost too late. So I'm in a deal. I've been nurturing that deal. I have, customer contact. They like me. And all of a sudden, a competitor comes in and does something that I was unexpecting, or comes in and drops the price. And the next thing you know, you have to drop your price and you're racing to the bottom. Or they come in and they point out a weakness that you've been trying to hide from the customer. And of course, that doesn't go over very well when that happens. So, having a strategy so that you can block that and trap that is a really critical thing. And that brings me to Colts. There's 5 key strategies, which I break into 3 stages. And the reason I break it into 3 stages is there's kind of the preparation area, that's stage 1, which we call the color code of accounts and opportunity questioning, the first 2. Stage 2 is loss recovery and trapping. And stage 3 is what I call silver bullet. And I'll take you down a little bit of it. So when you approach an account, you have basically 3 different ways you can approach an account. You can approach it frontal when you're very strong. If you're a Sun Tzu and the Art of War reader, you'll recognize these terms. Or if you're from the military, you'll know about flanking for sure, because you don't want to be caught by surprise or coming from the side. But very often, sellers always use the same approach. They go frontal, even when they're not the strongest. And sometimes that comes back to bite you. So I talk a little bit about what are the 3 kinds of approach, and based on what I call the account persona, how I'm going to approach. So in the first stage, I define something called the color codes. The color codes, there are 5 color codes. You have white, which is an account you've never called on, you really don't know a lot about. And it's not necessarily greenfield being nobody's ever called on them. There are times that are greenfield, but mostly it's I haven't called on them or my company hasn't called on them. And they don't know anything about it. Interesting enough, when I sold my business in 2018, CompeteNet, the one I talked about earlier, I had a major account, and it was a large electronics provider. And when I presented this account to the leadership of the company, they said, "Oh, we'll just put that through the call center. They're not a very big account." Now, the company bought me was about $400 million. The company that they were going to put to the call center was $28 billion, but they never heard of them and never called on them. No. And I said, whoa, you don't understand. This is a major count. So white can have different kinds of approaches. It's just something you haven't done before. The next one is red. A red account is an account that is hostile in some way, and it could be hostile for multiple reasons. One, it's your competitor's account, and they are dominant in there, and they have blocked you in every way possible, which makes sense, which means the account may not be very friendly when you go in. We've all entered those kinds of accounts. The other time they become red is when they've had a past experience and it wasn't good. And it doesn't necessarily mean the account. It could be the individual too. I one time went into an account that I thought we had a pretty good relationship, to find out the guy that they had recently hired, actually the gal that they recently hired, she had had a very bad experience with my company. And she told me, she said, I wouldn't buy this. You couldn't pay me enough to give you an order for this. Wow. That was a really tough situation because it wasn't my doing, but it was red and it was hostile. And I had to step back from my sales cycle and completely drop what I was doing and kind of open the kimono and just have a heart-to-heart kind of humility kind of conversation. Used a lot of candor. So this is a red account. Then you've got a yellow account. Yellow accounts are probably the most common. They buy from everyone. I go over here and I'll buy, let's say I was going out retail shopping. I go to Target one day, I go to Walmart the next day, try to avoid it. Macy's the next day, or one of those types of accounts. I can buy from anyone and I'm happy to get it wherever I find it. Yellow accounts, as I said, are the most common, and they usually start out with a fact-finding kind of conversation versus a red account. You're dealing with an obstacle or an objection first. So you change your approach, right? In a yellow account, I may go frontal and try to win the business if I know that I'm stronger than the competition. In a red account, I am definitely going to try to fragment and get a small piece of the account because they're not going to buy from me in a whole way. So I change my approach. Once we start moving to the upper two colors, green is an account that they buy from you all the time. You're constantly doing business with them. You've got a great relationship with them, and they like you. You have easy and good relations with them. You can go frontal. You can also fragment. But keep in mind, just because it's green in one department, let's say you're selling over here in the manufacturing or the IT department, you run over to the marketing department. They don't know who you are. And you might actually deal with it like it's a red account, more likely a yellow because you're already in the business, but that's the way. A blue account, you dominate. They call you first when they're making decisions. So that's the color codes, and there's 5 of them. It's a very, very easy way to quickly identify the competitive persona of an account. Apply that to the account.
Coding, Bentley.
What's that?
Who would do this color coding? Would that be a manager before he passes it off to his sales reps? And how would the technology allow you to do that? Because it's not like I got an Excel spreadsheet here with color coding for everybody. How would you do that? Because it makes a lot of sense, especially if I'm just starting my account. I think it would increase the training, meaning it'll be good much quicker. Because if I know I better be ready, this is going to be a tough one, or hey, this is a friendly account. I mean, it's from a salesperson's perspective, it makes it a lot easier than a phone number and a person, right? I mean, I can see why it would make a lot of sense.
David, depending upon what your CRM or your tools are, like your tool that will integrate the color codes. I mean, from the simplest point of view, just get some pens and mark, make a note of it or write the color in it. Who defines it? It's usually the seller. Now, obviously, if the seller's new and the sales manager's been calling in an account, he would be able to inform that. But you got to apply color codes not just to the account, but also to the individuals. Oh. So I'm going into a yellow account, excuse me, but I have a green relationship with this person there. I've been selling to them on and off for years. They really love us, and while the account isn't completely ours, the individual is, or the opposite, like I shared. There are a number of different ways you can write it into your CRM, but it's better when the tools actually give it to you, because salespeople and mostly the sales teams are visual. They want to see quick. Oh, geez, I know I've got to change my approach, which leads me to opportunity questioning, which is the second part of stage 1. If I'm going into a red account, I need to deal with questions and conversation like I talked about. If for a red account, I can't go in there and start fact finding. Well, I know you hate our guts, but can you tell me about the problem you're trying to solve and what keeps you up at night? Yeah, there's the door. Use the service elevator if you wouldn't mind. So it's you change your questioning based on the opportunity. Everyone uses questions. Every sales process tells you to use questions. The only thing I'm saying is organize your question. If I'm going into red, I want to deal with the objection and obstacle first. I probably also want to deal with political kinds of questions. So these are different ways to do it. If I'm going into a yellow or a green account, I want to go into fact finding first. These are great ways to organize your questions, all outlined in a book. And that's basically stage one. That's your setup. So moving on to stage two, now what do I do to execute, right? Well, you execute against your sales process. So you're going after a deal and you've identified that there's an opportunity to sell, this piece of software or this piece of infrastructure, or like this morning I was talking to somebody that makes microchip designs for high performance computing capabilities. I didn't even know it was my neighbor. And so I'm in there trying to sell these things, but I'm up against multiple companies. In fact, his case, he's competing with NVIDIA and he's competing with Intel. I need to set up some different strategies here. Yes, they have a unique differentiator. What they do, the other companies don't do, and that's a big help. But at the same time, they have about 5 products that can sell. And I do what I call a loss recovery strategy. This is what I was talking about when I was selling for Sun Micro, and I got beat by IBM by doing the financing. They had a loss recovery strategy. You can always have a second opportunity. The idea I've heard over the years, people have told me many, many times that there's only first place in sales. If you're second place, it means you lost. I don't believe that. I believe there's always a second opportunity. What I kind of advise is to be very careful of not mixing the two opportunities. When you find an opportunity and talk to the customer, what other things that are challenging? You may be able to solve it. A partner you have may be able to solve it. The idea is you want to win something, because when people become in these relationships and grow together, they become friends, whether you mean it to or not. And it's very difficult, unfortunately, and you've all been through it, to pick up the phone or Zoom or something, or in person, tell somebody that they lost the deal. In fact, you're so tempted to send it on an email, which is not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's just an emotional drain. It uses emotional capital. Well, what if the person that had to tell you weren't going to win the main deal, but he can pass you, or he or she can pass you a secondary opportunity? It takes that emotional burden off of them and gives them something to give you. It allows you to make a customer instead of a prospect out of them.
Right.
And that means the next year you get to watch what's going on. You get to be involved. Now, I'm not saying don't go after the main opportunity. That was my first caveat. Follow your sales process for the main opportunity, but always have a secondary loss recovery strategy. There are other loss recovery strategies as well that you can implement as part of it, because sometimes you have to execute a loss recovery strategy yourself because you've lost and you weren't prepared for it. I just like to be prepared. And if it's anything I can teach, these two strategies are the key. You can do these right away. Loss recovery, and the second one is trapping. And trapping has been by far my most favorite subject to talk about in all of the program, because I am setting up the competition. The idea is not to give yourself competitive advantage, but to create disadvantage for the competition. Have them trip up, right? And so I'm in there selling, and I know things like I have a weakness that I have to cover, right? It might be my personal weakness. It might be something that the company has. It might be part of our product or service that we don't do as well as the other company. Mm-hmm. And typically as a seller, I try to hide those things, right? Because I don't want that brought up. Guess what? Your competition is going to bring it up because they know it. And you know about their weaknesses. So you sit down and you have an open conversation. So let's look at everything that we do and they do and all the different things. And you build your value proposition around what you do. And then you have the conversation a little bit about what they're likely to do. And what's happening is you're very subtly setting a trap. So when the competition comes in and starts to say, well, they're very weak at doing this, executing this, or doing that, or these types of things, and customers are, yeah, I know that already. We had that conversation. It's not a problem. And what that does is it immediately puts the person on the other side on the defense. And there's a lot of really great trapping strategies. There's trapping for drastic price cuts. Something you do when what I call sell with price versus through price. So many times companies and sellers will use price as the differentiator. We're the low price leader, right? And all you end up doing is sadly racing to the bottom of the sale. But let's say you start selling with price. You start using price as part of your value proposition. You talk about it often. Then what you're doing is you're setting a trap for when the competitor comes in and tries to drop the price. So there's a number of different trapping strategies. They're a lot of fun, and they're super easy to do once you figure it out. So the two things when people ask me, what are things we can do right now? Let's say fourth quarter, last month, only a couple of weeks left in the year. What can I do right now? I can build myself a loss recovery strategy, and I can put in some traps for my competition. And I can do it immediately, and it's not going to impact the sales process that people are already using.
And so if Bentley, when they go in and they read your cold strategy in your book, you're going to go into further detail to delineate how they can actually use your trapping the competition. Because it seems to me it's almost like setting the proverbial stage so they walk in and they know exactly where they're going to go, what they're going to say, and how it's going to be retorted. I really like that. I don't think a lot of people do that. I mean, it seems like it makes a lot of sense to me, but I would think that that's like the super top 5 or 10% best practice salespeople. That's not your normal guy or gal.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. No, it's not done that often. There were a couple of loss recovery that's something that I just learned the hard way myself.
Right.
Trapping, there have been different trapping programs over time. I've never really dug into them. These are a lot of the things that I've put together my own model to be able to compete myself. Obviously, being a small company, we were competing with a lot of big companies, but it's really valuable. In the book, I not only give you the strategy, but I give you a worksheet to work from. And then I filled in the book, they're actually filled in with an example. So you can get the example. You can also go to our website and get the download of the worksheets. I've created a workbook that aligns to the book so people can download them. And I left them in Microsoft Word so that if somebody wanted to modify them for their own business, because obviously everybody's got something different industries, different ways of dealing with things, they're in there. So those examples are in the book. And to finish off cold, so it's color codes, opportunity questioning, loss recovery, trapping, and something I call the silver bullet strategy. And the silver bullet is obviously everybody wants the silver bullet, right? I mean, we love having a silver bullet. And I talk about, the silver bullet as being kind of a rare opportunity in a rare situation. I mean, you don't typically find too many silver bullets by companies. And when you do, it's usually pretty devastating to them. And the one I've been using lately, and I hate to because Boeing is one of the greatest companies that America has ever, founded and built. And they've just been having a real tough time lately, and especially with the 737 MAX. Everybody knows what happened. They had 2 aircraft go down. And that is a true to honest silver bullet. They cut corners, and those corners that they cut cost people's lives. And Airbus and every other airplane manufacturer has used it to its limit. And it's obvious that they had them sitting on the tarmac. I don't even know at this point where they are, but that cost billions and billions of dollars. Now, they're capable of handling that. A lot of small companies wouldn't be if you had a single point of failure in a product or service, or you did a very bad job and it became very visible. That obviously would be a killer silver bullet. But what happens when you don't have them? And there's a couple of ways to look at it. My first model in the book is about when you have a dominant competitor. So the other day we were at a Sales 3.0 conference in Kennedy Space Center, which, by the way, was amazing, with some of the most incredible speakers I've heard in a very long time. It was all about sales leadership, revenue management, and all the things that are in there. But I was talking with a small company, and they develop tools for accounting and control. And I don't want to call out who they are, but they're up against a company that has about 80% market share domination, and they're trying to sell against them. And I asked, so what is it that you do that's different? All the typical questions, and they have some differentiation, but the problem is that buying from the dominant player becomes the safe decision. And if we go back to the conversation we had about loss recovery, and we say if 70-80% of decision making is based on emotion, you think about that for a moment. I'm going to make the safe decision. So it's not that they're competing against them on the weakness of the dominant player. They're competing against the strength of the dominant player. And that makes it very, very difficult. When I started out, that dominant player was IBM, which is obvious. You never got fired for them. Same thing with companies like Xerox once upon a time, if anybody even remembers them, for what they were at one point as a dominant player, and that got taken apart. Kodak was a dominant player in the market. You look at all these companies, and what happens is you use the strategy, and it uses something called fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD. Because they're all three of them. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt are emotions. And you create concern about the dominance. In this particular case, we were creating concern about that particular company's solutions. The dominant player was going to hold back, from a competitive point of view, the company that was buying it. And that company was on a strive. They were looking to dominate the market themselves, and here they are using a company that isn't innovating like the younger companies, like the fintech and the martech and all the different tech companies that are building these new things that let you get ahead of your competition. So what I did is we created a concern, not necessarily with the direct buyer, but with the team above him and her, and what they were doing, so that their fears and uncertainties are, well, we have good operational tools, but we're not beating our competition. And so what you do, you're turning the competitor's major strength into a weakness. Obviously, if you have, another example you could have in a competitive market for silver bullets is, a company has had poor financial results for a quarter, or they had a bad product that they corrected, but or they may be discontinuing it. We use it all the time in the tech industry, but I like to use it more strategically. It does work, and it creates that silver bullet mentality that you need. Again, there's a worksheet. It's harder to do than loss recovery and trapping, but you can build out a strategy to beat a major competitor. There's one final part, and then I'll move on to what the end of it is. There's also a way to cause panic within a company, especially a large company, by seeding different pieces of this strategy throughout the regions, the locales, even the world, so that they think that you're doing something that maybe you don't really have the ability to do, and you cause a panic in the sales organization. And that, obviously, whenever you have somebody responding and reacting, it opens up opportunity. And then you go back to the concept of trapping, where you set up traps so that they lose their credibility in that call. That's just the angle. You're going to use a fragment strategy for that one, for sure. You want to get a foot in the door so that you can build the relationship, turn it from red to a yellow or to a green, where you become their solution. If you can get it to blue, you become obviously the consultant into the deal. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to build that credibility. One of the things you need to do, no matter what, is know your industry. people that sell, that understand their industry, are much better time and much easier time doing these three strategies than somebody that doesn't pay attention to it, because customers want to know you know about them and you know about their business. And so over the years, we've been deploying this strategy in multiple different ways. I kind of long-winded that one, but I hope I got you the answer you're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you're basically positioning yourself as a trusted advisor by game planning the entire stages of the Colts, right? Well, you're figuring out at each stage, who do I need to provide what information to get to that end stage, which is the signature and the buy, right? So what I see you doing is you're using your strategy to figure out who should attack which person at what part of the journey, what information do they need in order to come to the right decision, which is your product. It makes a lot of sense to me. So one of the things you did talk about is, you talked about one large retailer before the call, and you talked about where you were the incumbent. Could you just give us I know we're running a little bit late on time, but could you give us a brief synopsis? Because it was a great story. Would you help us out on that one?
Yeah, this was just the other day. This was really interesting. A good friend called and new to the business, just joined a very large tech firm, and dealing with, he landed 3 major accounts, really awesome accounts, and he's just crushing it. He's doing great, and he's known them for years because he came from another tech world. But one of the accounts he didn't really have a lot of experience with, and went in and started talking to him to find out that they were in the final stages of replacing everything that they were buying from his new company, going back to his old company.
Oh, great.
And we're talking, this is a top 10 retailer in the United States. And I was like, this is crazy. And he just got the account. So it's nothing to do with him. It's just the reality is they had nobody paying attention.
Would this be a red one?
I would say it's not red yet, but they were not unfriendly, but they were getting ready to leave. And I'd still say it was kind of between, maybe more like purple.
Okay.
A little bit between green and red. And so, the first thing, and I was proud of what he did. The first thing is he used a strategy that's in the book called stalling. So I've talked about frontal, flanking, fragmenting, develop, defend, but there's also another one called stalling.
Yeah.
And the idea behind stalling is to buy you time. And what he did is he got them to at least postpone it for 30 days on the decision so that he'd have the opportunity to fulfill some of the things that have been ignored for so long. And keep in mind, this was a piece of software, so it was there's a major change to replacing it. There's a major effort that has to go on. But the first thing he had to do was to keep it from going away. And he succeeded there. And actually, when I talked to him, I said, you may want to try to stall that longer. Give it a chance. The idea is that you want to have time to prove yourself because he's the incumbent. And I got a piece in the book called Loss Recovery When You're the Incumbent, which is absolutely awful when you lose a deal, especially when you're new and you're walking into the situation.
Well, it's also tough for that sales rep, right, Bentley? I mean, that poor person, that guy or gal's in there thinking, oh, this is my big money maker. And it's like, oh, my goodness.
It is a big money maker. And this kind of stuff happens. I mean, people leave, reorganizations changing. So I said, listen, stall it. Build an immediate loss recovery strategy. You need to have a backup because somewhere along the line, there's someone that has already made the decision to make the change. And so you better have something so that even if it's too late, you got in this late, you have something that you can fall back upon. That doesn't mean you don't go for it all, because I would go for it all. But the third thing I would do is I would absolutely set a number of different traps for that competitor so that they can't try to close that deal while you're in the middle of stalling and getting a chance to prove that you can do that. And that's a really important, there's 3 pieces of strategy right out of the book that could save that. Not 100%, but heck, I'd rather have something to go at than to go, oh my God, what am I going to do? So, and that is directly a competitive deal.
Yeah, it sounds to me like in those types of deals too, it's really important that you have leadership, coaching, and the training to back that up. Because if you're a salesperson, that's got to be super scary to come into that environment, and having the people around you to support you and go through this type of
Right.
strategy makes a lot of sense. And I can see how going from being absolutely terrified to make those phone calls and conversations to be like, I've got a plan. It might not work, but I've got a plan, and my team believes in it. I can see how that would really make a difference. So I can see how anybody that is into sales would definitely want to buy this and read it and that kind of stuff. But
Thank
one
you.
of the things that we talk about is we've talked about how the process, how the sales, the training, the coaching, the positioning, all of these things are absolutely critical to your success.
Right.
But there's another part that in 2022 we all have to use, and that's the software to support that decision making, so that you know that you're not forgetting stuff, that you're doing the right things. I mean, if I can recall, Bentley, you talked about those 3x5 index cards. Like I remember my dad, he had them in his pocket. You know, he'd be walking around the yard being like, "Oh, I've got to do the fruit trees," or "Oh, I've got to do this." Right? I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at the software today, what does that software need to do to support this amazing sales process that you've outlined here in Colts?
Well, I mean, obviously there's our partnership here, but I mean, let me start with the number of tools that are out there today, and sales enablement people. God bless them. They're awesome people trying to do things. We're probably doing too many tools right now.
Mm.
We have CRM, and they're hard to use. Salesforce is a great product, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And they have about a 30 to 40% usage rate. You've
Which I
got
think is a good number.
that's really high. You've got different kinds of AI tools. You've got Gong. You've got tools like Big Tin Can and other
Sample market.
other products that provide content directories, and you got your homegrown tools. They say that an average of 5 to 8 tools a salesperson has to deal with during a day. Obviously, some of them dial for you and make your life more efficient.
That's what you're supposed to do, right?
I started in sales, and my manager moved me quickly into a role where I was grouped with the top sellers, because I knew how to sell all the newest and greatest stuff, and they only wanted to sell the old stuff. And together we just knocked it down. And I recognized the need for sales performance. So I always kind of targeted my career at a performance model. That turned into sales enablement, eventually turned into field enablement, then sales enablement. Now it's partially called revenue enablement. Bringing all that together, bringing more tools. I started with those cards like you talked about. That's what I got handed. And I don't know why, until I met you guys, nobody else was just taking that ultra simple model that we used to use and making it available. And that's what I've enjoyed working with you, trying to build this out. It allows you to just embellish your current sales process and add all this little extra competitive stuff. I just follow the leader, just go straight down. Give me the dots, connect those dots, and let me do my sales job. Because what is so valuable about being a seller is your ability to be creative, right? To kind of do it yourself and build those relationships. Tools that try to make you follow exactly, the behavior of another person, it's just going to be impossible, because there's, you got 4 kinds of sellers. You've got the driver that can do most of it. You've got your amiable, that's friendly, nice, and easygoing, but necessarily doesn't bring the deals in. You've got your expressive, which is like me, you're just off there. You want to tell everybody about everything. And then you've got analytical, show me the data, right? And I've got all those, and my buyer is the same thing. It's a social selling model. I need to be able to put that together. Having the color codes helps you with that, because that's part of the color codes, is understanding the social angle of the seller, and being able to use a tool that doesn't require me to spend half my day figuring out what to do. In fact, they say that you lose an entire day on tools a week.
Really?
And imagine that. If a 5-day week, you lose an entire day just trying to track these tools. That's what I love about your product, is it takes that effort and that burden off of the salesperson. I'm fine with it being the operations person's job and everything else, but the salesperson's job is to talk to the customer. And that's what I try to do. And that's why I think this is a great partnership for us going forward.
Appreciate that. So if people are interested, they can just go to sentia.app, SENTIA.app, to give a perspective on how we actually help customers with their sales process, their sales methodology, putting them in the right place at the right time with the right information and the right way to do things. Who do I call? When do I call? Why do I call them? Or do I need an email or a text, right? Because the older folks don't even think about sending me an email. You better pick up the phone. And if it's a younger person, a millennial, it's like, if you give me a phone call, I will never speak to you again. So it's like, to your point, you got to be very precise, and having that software makes it really important. So Bentley, I have a hunch there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be rushing to Amazon to get your #1 best-selling book here. So do they just go to Amazon? How do we make sure that they get this? Or can they send you a quick email and you'll you know what?
I first, I welcome everybody to connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you. You can get the book. You can go to Amazon and type in my name or the name of the book, or you can just go to CompeteStrategyBook.com and it'll take you right to the site, which makes it easier for you to do. We also have a YouTube channel for Remedy Sales Academy. And of course, we have a phone number. So, and all things of it, people dial a phone number. We have an 800 number, and that's 800-820-0882. I've had that one for 20 years.
So that's been followed in the comment section, guys, so you can see Bentley's credentials, and you can grab them there if you like that. And was there anything else? So we can go to CompeteStrategyBook.com, and you can connect with Bentley on LinkedIn, J. Bentley Radcliff. And I really appreciate the time to speak with you, Jay Bentley. I'm really excited. The #1 best-selling book on Amazon. I'm pretty impressed.
New release. I want to try to keep it there. But yeah, we're #1. So we got to actually hit 2 categories: business negotiation and sales and selling, for new release. And it's really exciting. Listen, I love the strategy. I do a lot of coaching with people. People call me up and they say, I just call me or send me a LinkedIn and say, here's my challenge. Help me figure out a way of dealing with it. I learned that from my dad and a couple other mentors along the way, that they could do it after a number of years. And it allows you to be creative and enjoy it. And I just love doing this with people. I love the war stories I hear, and you can send me all the war stories. If you've got a funny competitive situation, I welcome it, and all of that. It's like, how do you enjoy what you do? Because selling is the best thing you can do in the world. It gives you the social, your friends, you have everything. I just love it, and it's a wonderful thing. And I appreciate the time, David, that you gave me today. And I look forward to it. Please connect with me, J. Bentley Radcliff, but I go by Bentley. And connect with me. I'd be happy to share with you my thoughts. The book, as I said, you can go to CompeteStrategyBook.com, or our website at Remedy Sales Academy, or CompeteStrategy.com will take you to our website, where you'll also find the book. We have lots of ways of getting there.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate that, Bentley. I'm sure folks are going to be going and checking that out. And also, I just got a note from our CEO, and he said that anybody that stayed all the way through this and is listening now, we will do a free sales process review at your company if you just state that you remember this part of it and you stayed to minute 54 in this interview. So not only do you get Bentley's book, but you get a free sales process review. Appreciate your time today, Bentley. Thank you kindly, and look forward to your next book.
Thank you. Yeah. It's already in the beginning, so I'm enjoying it. This is my second one. My other one was on RVing. So if you happen to be an RVer, you can find that book too. But anyway,
all right.
All good. Thank you, David, and thank everyone for staying with us today. And I hope it was of value to you. Cheers.
Thank you, Bentley. You have a great day. And thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you coming on, and check us out at Sentia.app or Remedies Brands. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.